My guest today is Rob Barnett, co-founder and chief product officer at the Modern Classrooms Project. Rob, welcome to the Liberated podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you here. I would love to just start, if we could, if by telling us a little bit about what the Modern Classroom Project is and kind of the organizations that you work with.
Yeah, absolutely. The Modern Classrooms Project is a nonprofit organization founded by teachers, myself and a teaching colleague of mine. And what we do is we empower teachers all around the world, any grade level, any subject area, any school, to build classrooms that respond to every learner's needs. We take some of the strategies that I and my co-founder used, teaching in public schools as well as private schools, that helped us respond to learners' diverse needs, and we share them with educators all over the world so that those educators can respond to their learners' diverse needs. I mean, teachers, parents, anyone listening, you know that in any room full of students, students are all over the place in terms of their interests, their backgrounds, their knowledge. It's really difficult for a teacher to, keep every student appropriately challenged and appropriately supported every day. And so we try to provide classroom tested techniques that help teachers do just that, challenge and support every learner every day.
And can you give us some sort of concrete examples of what that looks like?
Sure. Yeah. When I was a teacher, I felt like if I stood at the front of the room and tried to explain something, I was a high school math teacher. Some of my students would already understand it. They would be bored. Some of my students would have gaps in what they knew. They would be lost. They weren't prepared to understand it. Some students wouldn't be there at all. And I just found this was really frustrating for me and ineffective for my students. What I started to do when I was a teacher, and I did this in public school and private school, is I would record my instruction on a short video, 6 to 8 minutes long. I let students watch those videos in class or at home at their own paces. They could pause, they could rewind, they could rewatch. Now I spent my time in class working closely one on one with students or in small groups. Students could advance at their own paces. And at the end of each lesson, I would say to the student, before you go to lesson two, let's make sure you understand lesson one. So I'd give them something I call a mastery check. Show me that you've mastered this one lesson before you move on to the next. I found that kind of instruction to be much more effective for my students. My advanced learners could, fly ahead. My learners who needed more time had the time they needed to learn, and my students who were absent could catch up when they came back to class. And so that's what we now call the modern classroom model, and what thousands of educators all over the world are using in their classrooms today.
Yeah, so you work mostly with public schools, although you do have private schools in your network as well. And so, are you basically able to use these tools and have them be compatible with any kind of curriculum framework, or how are you interacting with the curriculum that each school is either mandated to teach if it's a public school, or is sort of curating if it's a more of an independent school?
Great question. And yes, we work with any teacher anywhere. I always think if you think this will work, it will. And if you think it won't work, then it probably won't. So any teacher who wants to change the way instruction looks in their classroom can do this. Just speaking from my own experience, I started teaching like this at a big Title I public high school in Washington, D.C. I continued teaching like this at a elite international boarding school in Switzerland. And although the students came from very different backgrounds, I think the challenge of teaching, right, having students with different needs in the same room and needing to teach them all was fundamentally the same. So, just from my own experience, different content, different curricula, it worked in both places. It was needed in both places. I think that we work with all grade levels and subject areas, and teachers can use a lot of different curricula with this approach. I think what Modern Classrooms provides is more an instructional model that says instead of doing most of your instruction whole class to the students who happen to be there on any given day, think about how you can digitize some of your instruction so that you spend your time in class working closely with young people, one on one or in small groups, that students have the time they need to learn and that students actually master content before they move on. It's really a sort of pedagogy that can work with different curricula, different subjects, and different age groups as well.
Got it. So, Rob, let's hear a little bit more about your background. You said that you were a teacher in both public schools and in private schools. How did you get into education in the earliest days, and what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I became a teacher, I think, like a lot of teachers, because I liked working with young people. That, I always had younger siblings, younger cousins in high school and college. In the summers, I worked at summer camps. I like being around young people, getting to know young people. I like the excitement and sometimes the frustration of working with students. I think when I became a teacher, especially in big, crowded public school classrooms, I realized I wasn't actually working that closely with my students. I was standing at the board, controlling behavior and trying to get disengaged students to listen to me and follow my directions, even though my directions were too easy for some, too hard for others. And some students were coming in on Wednesday after missing Monday and Tuesday, so they were lost. And so, really, I think why I developed this approach to instruction is because it let me do what I wanted to do in the first place, which was spend my time in class, not before school, not after school, sitting down with my students, getting to know them, building relationships, working closely with young people. That's why I went into education, and that's what I loved about education. I like math perfectly fine. It's interesting, but teaching is about the young people.
Yeah, and so many of my audience members are teachers, either currently working in a traditional classroom and thinking about going off on their own to start their own schools or to become education entrepreneurs, or they've already done that. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your entrepreneurial journey. Sort of when did you know that you wanted to move into entrepreneurship? And what was sort of that process of going from idea to launch like back in 2018?
I think it was really accidental. I was teaching in the way I've described, and a colleague of mine saw how I was teaching and said, I like doing this too. I'm going to start teaching this way. His name's Kerry, and he's my co-founder. We were just teaching like this because it helped our students. Actually, I ended up moving after we taught together in DC. I moved abroad to Switzerland. I wanted a change of pace and to experience teaching in a different setting, but he stayed in Washington, DC. He was actually named DC Public Schools Most Innovative Educator shortly after I left. And so people started paying attention to what he was doing and saying, wow, what you're doing in your classroom is really cool. And it was. I mean, he's an amazing educator, and he used this model extremely effectively with his students. And so he and I had remained in touch, and we said, people are interested in this. We should train them. So in 2018, we decided to train 8 teachers at our high school. They didn't have
And this
computers in
was
their class.
in the DC school, or you
Yeah,
were in both school? Okay, so you were still
this
in
is,
Switzerland at the time?
I was teaching in Switzerland, but I had the summer off. So I came
I
back
see.
to DC for the summer. And we had colleagues at Eastern Senior High School who wanted to learn. They didn't have computers for their students. So we said, let's start a nonprofit. Let's raise money. Let's purchase computers for our colleagues. Let's train them in how to use our approach and see how it goes. So we trained them in the summer of 2018, 8 teachers. That next year, Kareem and I were both teaching full time. He in DC, I was teaching in Switzerland, supporting these educators. And we saw, wow, these 8 teachers are doing great. Like they're really liking our model. So the next summer, 2019, we said, let's train 25 teachers just across the DC area. From 8 to 25 is a big jump, but 25 is not too many. But that training went really well. And so he decided to work for Modern Classrooms full time. I was still living abroad. I was working, half time for Modern Classrooms. And it was going really well. So we thought, let's put our materials online in case anyone else is interested in learning about this. And then in 2020, COVID came and teachers saw our model, even though it had been developed as a model before COVID, as a series of techniques that would really help them with virtual learning. So we went from training 8 teachers in 2018 to 25 in 2019. I think in 2020, we trained over 700
Wow.
with an additional 10 or 15,000 taking our free online course. We did that by empowering the teachers who we had trained to come become trainers for us. So now what we operate is really a train the trainer model. Teachers use our model effectively. They come work for us. They provide training. You know, 5 years later, we've had about 80,000 teachers all over the world take our free course. We have a mentorship program that trains thousands of teachers every year. And yeah, that certainly wasn't the vision or the intention when we started out. I think we just felt like we have something that works for us. We think it can work for other teachers. Let's figure out how to share it. And when we put it out there, we realized teachers need this. Public school teachers, private school teachers in the US, abroad, we're all facing the same challenge. We all have classes of students with different needs. We all need an approach that lets us meet every learner's needs.
Oh, such a great story. I really like how you talk about your pilot in that first summer with a handful of teachers in 2018, and then basically tripling to the next year in 2019 to more teachers, again, leveraging summer. And I think that that's such a great strategy for a lot of prospective founders, certainly the ones that I talk to, if they're going to launch a new school or a learning model. They might start by running an after school program or a tutoring program on the side or a summer camp, just to sort of start the process of building up a name for themselves, having visibility in their community, testing out their model, experimenting, tweaking, iterating. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, sort of that pilot stage, and maybe what recommendations you would have for other education entrepreneurs or teachers turned entrepreneurs, um, sort of getting started maybe more slowly and building up from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say that our timing was just right, even though COVID, of course, was a horrible thing for the world because we had 2 years, basically, 2 summers followed by school years to figure out what we were about, what our training was, what teachers needed. And then we put it online just at the right time, which is when COVID came. And so it grew faster than we were ever anticipating. But I think what was so important was we started with 8 teachers. We all knew them personally. They were Kareem's colleagues at the time and my former colleagues. So we knew each other. And some of them were English teachers and history teachers. And Kareem and I sort of said to ourselves, as math teachers, can this work in English? Like we literally had no idea whether it would work or not, but we had a teacher at our school who was interested in doing it. We knew she was a fantastic teacher. We said, we're going to train you and you help us figure it out. Same for science teachers and history teachers. And so starting with that really small group that we knew, they were in the same school building as Kareem. So in his planning period, he would go visit their classes and talk to them. And, we were all like, we were friends outside of being partners in this sort of pilot. That really helped us refine what it is that we were doing. And then next year, growing, but at a reasonable amount to 25 teachers, it was the same thing. It was like we really got to know them. I think you hear this a lot in entrepreneur startup kind of circles. Start with a few people, find your customers and really meet their needs. And I think that's what helped us create something that resonated with teachers at scale was the fact that we had really worked closely with a handful of teachers to find something that worked.
Yeah, and how has the financial model evolved over time then, Rob, from again that pilot group just sort of testing out your model to now thousands of teachers, many schools using your product. How does that work?
Yeah, that's something that we've also sort of built as we went because at the beginning, like I say, we didn't have a business model. We were raising money from friends and family to get something off the ground because we thought it would help. Today, as we're a nonprofit, about a third of our funding comes from unrestricted donations. About a third of our funding comes from contracts that we sign with schools and districts to provide professional development. And that last third is somewhere in between. It's foundations who give us money to go out, find, and train teachers. So you could think of them as sort of buying our training, but not for themselves, for teachers in the communities that they serve. And that's been a really good model for us. I think it's diversified. Like we are selling training to schools and districts. And that means that we have to be really attuned to what schools and districts want, right? We are selling to a customer, and that keeps us really disciplined about providing something that has value because otherwise they won't pay for it. But it's nice to be a nonprofit also because we work with these amazing donors and foundations who push us to innovate, and that's really nice as well.
Yeah, so let's hear your sales pitch for some of the private schools that you work with. That's, again, most of my audience would be people running private schools or thinking about running private schools. So, what would the pitch be to them? How would they be able to work with you, and why should they?
Yeah, I think no matter where you teach, the students who you serve have different needs. And if you expect that they can all go to the same lesson for the same amount of time and learn this exact same things, I think you're going to be disappointed. I think young people need different levels of challenge and support every day. And so teachers want to provide that, but the standard sort of model of teaching doesn't train or empower teachers to do that. Teachers are trained to deliver a single lesson per day. What we help teachers do is think about how do I redesign a lesson or how do I redesign my course such that every student is appropriately challenged and appropriately supported every day. And so I think no matter where you are or who you teach, that approach to instruction is going to have benefits for teachers and more importantly for students. In terms of how you can work with Modern Classrooms Project, we're a nonprofit organization. We make all of our materials available for free on our website. We have an online course at learn.modernclassrooms.org, and you can find every resource we've ever created available for free. The training that we sell is much more personalized. It's like a mentorship program. So if you're a if you're a private school leader and you have two teachers who are interested, they can join our program. It's a cost per teacher. We'll pair them with expert educators in our network who we think would be good matches. If you have a middle school English teacher who's interested in learning this model, I can try to support that person, but I won't be that good at it. I was a high school math teacher. We'll find a middle school English teacher in our network who's an exceptional educator using our model, and your teacher will work with our teacher to really figure out how does this look in a middle school English classroom. And that's how it starts, by the way. If you're a school leader listening to this, I would not recommend that you go out and purchase our training for every teacher in your school. Find the people who are interested, start with a couple, pilot it, see how it works for them, and then find more teachers who are interested. I think our approach really can help teachers provide instruction that helps every student succeed.
Yeah, and I just love that the materials are available for free on the website as well, so folks can take a look at that. I'm sure it's a treasure trove of information and materials there. So, I'd love to hear a little bit more, Rob, about the new book that you recently published, because in addition to being a teacher and an entrepreneur, you're also an author. Share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the book, thank you for mentioning it. The book just came out. It's called Meet Every Learner's Needs. And I call it 10% memoir, telling of the story I've told today in a little more detail. 10% manifesto, which is sharing, what I believe to be true about teaching and learning, and 80% educator manual. I really wrote it to be a step-by-step guide to how do you implement this approach in your school, starting with an individual lesson, then thinking about how do you create a modern classroom course, and finally, how do you share what you're doing with the world? Because that is ultimately my story. I started by redesigning a single lesson. Then I figured out how to, make my courses self-paced and mastery-based. And then I shared it with Kareem, and you know, 8 years later, here I am speaking with you. So I tried to tell that story in book form, because we have so many free online resources. You don't need to buy the book or read the book. Like, you can learn this model for free on our website. But I do think that for people who like learning in that way from books, and for people who like engaging deeply with ideas, a book can be really helpful in a way that online resources sometimes are not. So there's my pitch for the book.
Great. Yeah, so as you reflect now on, I think you said about 8 years that you've been an education entrepreneur, I'd love to hear your reflections. Sort of what have been the most rewarding parts of entrepreneurship for you, as well as the challenges.
Yeah. The reward for me, I think the biggest reward is just waking up every day and working on something that I really believe in and is best for, young people and for educators. In addition to the things you mentioned, I'm a parent. What I'm writing about in the book and talking about is the kind of education I want for my kids. This isn't something, for kids only in boarding schools in Switzerland or only in Title I schools here in the US. This is an approach for everyone, and it's a privilege to be able to wake up you know and work on that. It's of course rewarding to go to classrooms and visit teachers and hear them and their students talk about the benefits that this approach has had. We often have teachers tell us, this has kept me in the profession, or I've been teaching 20 years and I wish I'd known this at the start of my career. This has been so helpful. And students, as you can imagine, like learning this way too. They don't like sitting in rooms, being asked to be quiet and follow along at the teacher's pace when they don't understand. They like to have ownership of their learning. They like to go at their own paces. They like to achieve mastery and take pride in that. Um, you know, Certainly it has been challenging, and I think in education, innovation can be challenging because there's so much inertia in the system. It's such a traditional system that we have, and there are so many initiatives that sound great to try to improve things. And so you know, to get people's attention and convince them about what I believe about teaching and learning is always a challenge. But I believe this is what's right, so I'm motivated to continue advocating for it.
That's great. So, as we begin to wrap up, Rob, what advice would you have for others listening, especially former teacher, current teachers, I should say, similar to you, who want to venture out into education entrepreneurship, leave the classroom behind, whether that's a public school classroom or private school classroom or some other kind of learning environment, to become an entrepreneur? What advice would you have for them as they get started on that journey?
Oh wow. That's a great question. I think the advice I have is to the advice I have is, if there's something that really works for you and you know that it has worked for you, it will work for other people too. Because the problems that we face as educators are universal challenges. They're fundamental challenges. And when you have a solution, something that you really know works, chances are it will work for other people too. I think what you have to do is figure out how to, you know, how to share it and how to communicate it in a way that feels like it's applicable to others. I think I know when I was a teacher and I would go to professional development, the first thing I would think is, well, this person doesn't know me. This person doesn't know my school. This person doesn't know my students. And that's true if you're listening to this. I don't know anything about your students or your context, and I'd be the first one to admit that. So I need to try to figure out a way to say, even though I don't know anything about your particular school, here are some challenges that you might be facing. And if these challenges resonate with you, here's what worked for me and why. And I think, that has been effective for us at Modern Classrooms. It's just telling our story, explaining why this worked for us, and making it as easy as possible for teachers to follow. to follow in our path. So I guess what I would say is, take hope. I think if you have something that works, it will work for other people. But the challenge is figuring out how to convey that in a way that, gets through to busy, stressed, overwhelmed teachers. Because the work of teaching is busy, stressful, and overwhelming, even for the best of us.
So, Rob, if my listeners and viewers want to learn more about the Modern Classrooms Project, maybe download some of those free resources, and connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, at modernclassrooms.org, you'll find more about the organization. And at learn.modernclassrooms.org, you'll find our completely free online course. And I hope you'll sign up. And there you'll find also information about, the mentorship program I've described, sort of our partnership options. If you are a book person and you'd like to learn more about the book or contact me, I have a website which is meeteverylearnersneeds.org. That has all information about the book. It also has a lot of free resources and it has a way to contact me as well.
Wonderful. Well, it's been so great to connect with you, Rob, and hear more about the Modern Classrooms Project. Rob Barnett, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thanks for listening.